This is Ray Mofield, and we're beginning another program in the oral history series for the Commonwealth of Kentucky State Archives, for the Marshall County Library, and for Murray State University's Pogue Oral History Library. The program is sponsored here in Marshall County by WCBL Radio, and it's being paid for by a grant from Shelby McCallum, the owner of the station. We have in the studio today as our guest for the next 30 minutes or so, Elmo Reed. I think most of you probably will know Elmo. He grew up in what I call the Brewers section. Elmo, would it embarrass you too much if we ask you how old you are?
I'm 64, September 4th, 1918.
And did you go to Brewers school?
Well, I went to Van Zora, one-room school first, then I advanced on to the big school Brewers.
All right. Now, just to get things in perspective, sometimes these tapes are used by researchers in genealogy. Could you tell us your parents' names?
Cliff Reed and Nina Mae Reed.
And your mother, before she married, what family was that?
She was from the Joe Cole family.
Joe Cole. Yeah. Cole's a rather famous name around Brewers, I guess. It seems to me my English teacher at Hardin married Herman Cole. That might have been part of that family.
Part of the same family.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, Mr. Cole taught for a good many years and then became a mail carrier, still a good friend of mine. His wife is, I believe, deceased. Do you know either side of the family, the grandparents?
Well, I just barely remember the grandparents on my mother's side. My father's grandparents died before I was born. They were both farmers.
They farmed in the Brewers community.
Mm-hmm.
And you were born in that community.
That's right.
Now, at Van Zora, do you remember anything much about the school at that time? What was it like? Wasn't a log building at all?
No, it was just a little white one-room schoolhouse, still standing there. His family living in it now.
Do you remember any of your teachers, Elmo?
Yes, Jack Gatlin was my first teacher.
Jack Gatlin, all right. That probably brings back a few memories. Did you go all 8 grades there?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You remember any of the other teachers? Sometimes a little hard to bring up some of that stuff, isn't it?
Arvis Darnell, Leela Green, Palmore Lyles. They had quite a turnover of teachers out there.
Yeah.
We got rid of about one a year.
Well, I went to Blakely, which is just barely across the Marshall County line over in Callaway, just south of Wadesboro. And I think they had a teacher there every year, and then my dad was a sharecropper, and we moved a lot. And so I went to, I think in the 8 years we had about 6 different teachers altogether. So I suppose that was typical. They were all looking for a little better location. All right. The school then was one room, you say. Mm-hmm. Do you remember any of the special features that you enjoyed most? I know you were a musician. Were you interested in music even back in grade school?
Oh, yes, yes.
Did you start out very young playing some kind of an instrument, or?
Oh, yeah, I started out when I was about 7 playing the violin and guitar. I was the musician at Van Zora.
Well, great. Isn't that wonderful? Did either of your parents play music?
Oh, yes. My dad played violin, and my mom played violin and guitar and piano.
Mm-hmm.
They had both studied music, which is kind of
an oddity for rural people
in
mm-hmm. Marshall County. I know neither of my parents studied. Of course, Dad only finished, I think, the 6th grade.
The first formal music lesson I ever had was at Murray State University.
After you'd started college?
Yeah.
Of course, when I was there, you were one of my heroes then. You were a little bit ahead of me, I guess. But I recall living at the old Brother Wooldridge's house, a Baptist preacher right across from Murray State Library. And Rayburn Watkins and I were roommates.
Mm-hmm.
Eugene Wagner, and then there were 4 of us lived in that ground floor suite on the right as you went in, and see who the other fellow was Hollis Robertson, a boy from Texas who played football, later became a minister of the Church of Christ. And you were upstairs, weren't you? Or,
I was thinking we were downstairs on the right as we went in. Are you sure you haven't got the floors?
well, you may have been when you first went there. I don't know, but that's where I ended up. That's
Was
the only
it?
place I remember. I don't recall now just what room you did. In fact, I can't remember I remember there was a boy there named Ned York from Friendship, Tennessee, that was the other boys were always pulling pranks on, and they'd always say something at the table, I remember, to make him sick, where he wouldn't eat, and then we'd have more food.
Well, Arvid Larson and Bill Parrish and I moved in those 2 rooms on the ground floor on the right as you went in.
That was before I
guess it
started,
was,
I
yeah.
imagine,
Yeah.
because I started in the fall of 40. What year did
Oh,
you?
well, that was 38, so that...
38.
Yeah.
Now, when I moved, in fact, I didn't move in there till 41, I guess it was. My first year, I kind of hitchhiked back and forth from Hardin. I didn't have enough money to go to college, really.
Well, that was our means of transportation back then.
Yeah. So, well, back to Van Zora now. Well, I presume your music wasn't in the curriculum.
Oh, no.
What was your favorite subject on those that they taught us back then?
Recess, I guess.
Were you a champion speller, maybe? Or?
No, my sister was. She won the county spelling bee, but I never was. I wasn't too good a student, to be honest with you, back in those days.
You were more interested in playing the violin. Yeah. I heard it just occurred to me that, and this doesn't fit in a particular pattern, but it seemed like I heard a rumor about you one time that you were the first person that ever majored in, was it bass fiddle at Murray? Or?
I was the first person, self-taught musician to ever be admitted to Murray, and the only one as far as I know.
Yeah. And was your featured instrument the bass viol?
No, the guitar was my main instrument, but after I got to Murray, I'd played. Dr. Bean over at Brewer's had a string bass that he insisted I take home and learn how to play, and I had played it, but it wasn't too much fun to play the bass fiddle by yourself. So
No, that's right. You don't carry much melody on the bass fiddle, I guess. All right, what about the activities at school? Do you remember any of the games you played back then?
Well, did you guys ever play Wolf Over the River?
Oh, Wolf Over the River, sheep meat and no liver. They said that. I don't remember now exactly how it went, and there was a game called, Red Rover?
Red Rover, but I don't remember how that went. But
Well, it seems to me that got pretty rough. They'd say, Red Rover, let Elmo come over, and the people on the other side had their hands joined, and you had to run and try to break their arm grip.
Mm-hmm.
And if you broke it, I guess you were the winner. And if you didn't, then you maybe you became part of the line. I've forgotten now the exact details of it.
Well, I remember Wolf Over the River. The entire school played it, first grade through 8th.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be 2 trees, 2 posts. Is that the way you played
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
One guy would get out, and the first one would get caught, and you had to pat him on the back 3 times, then he helped you catch the rest, and so on till everyone was caught.
Everyone had been caught.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we thought that was enormously funny, and then we played, it was sort of a variety of baseball. They called it town ball, but you could cross them out by throwing the ball in front of them, and you didn't have to tag them.
Or you could hit them and get them out.
Or you could hit them and get them out. And let's see, were there any other differences? My memory's a little hazy there about town ball.
Well, the way we played it, there weren't 2 teams. You just started out, and when someone got out, you moved up a notch from field to third base, second base, first base, pitcher, catcher. Then you went to bat. So
Oh, that's right. You played all the positions till finally
You got up to bat.
you got up to bat, and
Yeah.
that was the hour of glory.
Yeah.
Well, you've refreshed my memory there on town ball, and of course I guess we played marbles and
Yeah.
hopscotch maybe,
Yeah.
and sometimes fox and dogs. You remember that?
No, that's a new one.
Well, we some of the faster boys usually would be the fox, and they would run, and the others all tried to catch them. They were the dogs. And I recall one year at Stone School, where I was graduating in the class of '36, I was one of the fastest boys then, and they had me as the fox, and we decided we'd just run clear away. We played it at noon hour, so we ran about 5 miles out in the country. School went till 4, and we were supposed to be back, of course, at 1 o'clock, and we didn't get back till about 2:30. Hugh Hurt was the teacher, and he had a paddle there, and I mean he wore our rear ends out for that one. So we didn't run totally away anymore after that. All right, now you probably didn't get all the whippings I did. Was it discipline?
I never got a whipping in school in my life. I guess I was too timid.
Well, let's see. How many days did we go to school?
That's what I was going to ask you. Seems to me that 7 months, was it?
We had 7 month terms. I remember that. And I was going to say that if we averaged about 20 days a month, which I suppose we did, that'd be 140 days of school, wouldn't it? So I guess I got 140 whippings.
I remember Taylor Day was the happiest day of the year because that was the last day of school. You can go home and start farming.
Yeah.
It was a real holiday.
Well, now, when I first started in Callaway County, we started school the day after the 4th of July every year. And so we went July, August, September, October, November, December. January was the last month, and the end of school was in February. And I suppose in an agricultural economy that allowed you to drop tobacco plants. Or. By the way, did your father farm?
Yes.
Well,
He raised tobacco.
you know what dropping plants means.
I sure do.
You pulled them off the plant bed. And did you ever sucker?
Oh, yes.
Worm it?
Yes.
We didn't. You know, they didn't have very many sprays back in those days. I can recall that in later years, my dad, we'd take a can and nail a tobacco stick on the side in an upright position. We'd fill that can full of, well, you couldn't use Paris green full strength or it'd burn the tobacco. So you mixed it with flour, and we'd fill that can and we'd move along and we'd tap that stick with another stick, and that would dust a little bit of Paris green onto the plant, but it still wasn't 100%, so you'd have to worm that stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes those big old tobacco hornworms would get as large as your finger.
Yeah, we used to dust it in little bags. We'd take it and we could take 2 rolls at a time, 2 bags, and I told my dad we had a little mule. I said, let's just try it putting 4 sticks on a bag, and I'll ride that mule and go through the field. But that didn't work too well.
Oh, you used your head, Elmo. A real inventor there.
I'll never forget my neighbor saying he was not going to raise tobacco when he grew up because you had to pick it up too many times. Did you ever stop and think how many times you pick a tobacco plant up?
Well,
in the process of growing it?
I hadn't thought directly about it. I know my dad once said that it took 13 months to grow dark-fired tobacco. And I got to thinking about it. We'd burn the plant bed in January. Usually there'd be some kind of a nice spell in January, and you'd burn the plant bed, and that was to kill the weed seeds. And you'd get your canvas and canvas the bed where the frost wouldn't kill the plants, and then you didn't sell the stuff till after you'd already burned another plant
Yeah,
bed.
yeah, I'd run over into the...
So it overlapped a 12-month year. I
Well,
do
back in
remember
those days, a farmer would actually pick up that plant from the plant beds 24 times before he sold
that. Well, you've got the figures. Well, I know, of course, setting tobacco was one of the hardest things I ever did. It always killed my back.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
We had 3,600 plants to the acre. They set it in squares where you plowed it both ways. And there'd be 3,600 if I'm remembering correctly. By the time you bend over 3,600 times, and we were growing in the early days before the AAA cut back and gave you tobacco allotments, we'd grow about 5 or 6 acres of tobacco. That's a lot of times for your back to bend over.
Yeah, and you figure 3,600 plants that you handle each plant 24 times.
Yeah. That's an enormous figure. Take a mathematician to work on that. We needed a calculator, didn't we? But we didn't have it. All right, after you finished at Van Zora, then you went to Brewers. You were not the tallest person in the world, but nearly everybody was involved some way in basketball. Were you?
No, I was the 6th player, and I didn't like, unless I could be on the main team, I didn't like it, so I just quit.
Who was the coach back in your...
Carl Johnson from Hardin. You probably...
Oh, yes, Carl Johnson was the principal my senior year at Hardin. He married Mary Alice Mathis from Brewers, I believe.
Yeah.
It might have been some of her brothers, or at least cousins, who were on the great Brewers team of '48.
Her cousins.
Uh-huh. Yes, I remember Carl Johnston real well, and he was a brilliant mathematician, chemist, and so on. I believe he's worked in chemistry in the Peoria, Illinois area since that time. Maybe he's retired by now. But I can recall going to Brewers for ball games, and they had a little Delco out there, and nearly every time the thing would stop during the ball game, and the lights would all go out, and somebody would go around with a flashlight, and they'd crank on it a while, and refill it with fuel or do something. And
that little motor was in the back of the study hall, and that was the noisiest room in the building.
Yeah. Oh, we had a lot of fun, though. Now, what about recreation? Besides, we talked about school games. What did you do as a young man then? You didn't have television. I don't guess you went to the movies every day.
No. In high school, we could afford about $10 a week. They had a 10-cent movie at Mayfield. We usually maybe get out to that once a week. That was about it as far as movies went.
So, now, since you were in music, you might have been in big demand for such things as square dances and play parties.
Well, they called them round dances back then. I didn't do much square dance playing. I would go out with my guitar while Jay Smith would play the violin. We had a band at first. I'd play for dances, and they'd pass the hat. And I kind of wised up and found out that when they passed the hat, if I went by myself, I had 4 times as much money, so I started going out as a guitar soloist and playing for dances.
Yeah. Well, very good. All right, now, you finished at Murray. Did you manage to get your degree before the war caught you?
Yeah.
And then you were in service, were you?
Yes.
What branch?
Army Band and Orchestra.
And you spent most of your time then in playing.
Yeah.
Were you always in the United States? Or
no, we got to see most of Europe from the back of a truck. And the smaller places.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So your music, in a way, saved you from a lot of foxhole digging and so on.
I was lucky there.
A fellow told me once, this may not be true, but it makes a pretty good story. It said that he learned not to volunteer for everything. He said he'd always liked music, and he played a little piano and so on, and so they asked for volunteers, any music lovers in the group. So he raised his hand very rapidly, and they said, "Come on, we need to move some pianos." So he didn't get to play after all, but he did get to use his back pretty hard. All right, you want to tell something about your travels, the jobs you've had, and different places you've been?
You mean my musical?
After you came back. Incidentally, did you marry before you went in service?
No.
Oh.
Well, to make a long story short, I after I got out of high school, I'd planned on farming.
Mm-hmm.
I bought a team of mules and was putting out a crop of corn down on Clark's River, and a car drove up looking for a bass fiddle player to play with Eddie Lewis Orchestra, and I don't know who told him about me or how he found me, but I went to Paducah to audition with Eddie Lewis Orchestra. I found out his wife, the bass player's wife, had a premature baby in Cairo, so they were in dire need of a bass player, and I joined Eddie Lewis, and then went from Eddie Lewis to Murray, and we're in the Army. I went to Columbia University, got my master's, and
Columbia University in the city of New York. I have a master's from there, too.
Is that right?
Yeah. I didn't realize that you went there.
Yeah.
See, I'm learning all kinds of stuff here.
And after I graduated from Columbia, I got a job in a country band, the Village Barn.
In New York?
Yeah. And one night I was coming back from the Village Barn, I got on the subway, you know, some of those stations, you can get in from two sides.
Yes, sir, I remember that.
And I walked in the door, and I ran into Roy Hammerslang, a guy that I'd spent some time in the Army band with, and he was managing Enoch Light's orchestra.
Oh, I remember the Enoch Light
And,
Orchestra well.
He gave me a job in that outfit, and I played with them until we were playing a theater. And then, remember the jazz band used to play between movies?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I had a little bass solo, and I walked up front to take my bass solo, and the guy that was kind of in charge of the show yelled down, "That old bald-headed man needs to get him a wig. He shines like a new moon up here." And that really kind of jarred me. I wasn't married, you know,
And here you were, a real young fellow.
Well, I was about 26 or 7, and
But you lost your hair early.
yeah, I began to get thin back early. So I called Fred Zimmerman of the New York Philharmonic, who was my teacher at Columbia also, string bass, and told him I'd like to get into a college long enough to meet a wife, but I wasn't meeting anybody where I was. So Fred Zimmerman recommended me to Butler University in Indianapolis, and I got that job, and that's where I met my wife, Doris.
Was she from the Indianapolis area?
She was going to school there at Butler when I taught there.
And has she been happy in Kentucky?
Oh, yes.
Well, that's good. Did she grow up on a farm, maybe?
Yes.
Rural area. So
her dad was a Baptist minister, but she grew up on a farm.
So you had similar backgrounds in a way. Yeah. Well, those are very, very interesting stories. Time is rapidly flitting away. Before we lose completely out, could you sort of capsulize the rest of your career from then on? Did you have any children?
Yes, I have 5 children.
5 children, and they're all grown now.
They're all grown. One's a doctor, and 2 are teachers, and one's a contractor, and one's a certified accountant. So
they've done extremely well, I would say. Do any of them live in this area, or?
All 2 in Louisville, and 1 in Cincinnati, and 1 in Dayton, Ohio, and 1 here.
Are you expecting any home for Christmas?
3 of them are coming home today.
Well, great. That's wonderful. I know that always makes us happy. Then, in somewhat recent times, I can't remember when, except I do remember buying a silver flute from you once when my daughter she's now 27, so has been teaching for the last 5 years. And time flies, but I don't remember what year it was, but you had a music store out in the county, didn't you?
Yeah. We sold that about 3 years ago. I've retired completely. I'm not at Murray or UTM or any place. I'm just farming where I started 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
All right, your two references there, you might explain for the listeners a little more completely. You taught, did you teach simultaneously at Murray and
Yeah.
UTM?
Yeah. I started UTM in 70, Murray in 72. Taught guitar at both places part-time.
So you were teaching part-time at UT and at Murray State. How long did you teach at Murray?
I must have been there 9 years.
Well, you got a little bit of a teacher pension then, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, good. That's fine. I can recall when you had some classes there. As a matter of fact, I believe you taught some, I guess they were volunteer classes here in the county.
Well, I taught in the county 13 years here also.
Well, you were actually in the school system.
Yeah.
Well, good.
So I was happy to find out that my Murray teaching also added to the Marshall County pensions.
Sure. Exactly the same in our case at Murray State as the public school retirement system. Well, that's very good. When you were growing up, do you remember anything about medical care that you received? Did you?
Well, do you remember Dr. Bean from Brewers?
Yes, sir, I do, sort of vaguely. I never did go to him as a patient, but
he was a...
I remember that he gave the land where Brewers High School was built, didn't he?
He was a wonderful person.
Very prominent citizen, good civic-minded.
He was very interested. He was one that encouraged me to take music long before I ever dreamed of going into it as a profession. He loaned me his bass fiddle and guitars and things.
And so that was your family doctor.
Yeah.
Did your mother have any old-fashioned ways like some of our parents had and believes you could ward off the disease by giving you sassafras tea maybe in the spring?
We had sassafras tea, but I don't remember. We just liked it and couldn't afford anything else.
It was supposed, it seemed to me, to thin your blood down where you would be healthier during the summer and so on. I wonder if you ever ran into having your chest covered with a flannel cloth and Vicks salve and so on, and then you had to rub all the sore places with cloverine salve or some such stuff. And did you ever go with an asafoetida bag around your neck?
No, that's a stinking one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it smelled horrible.
No.
I think that disease would have been afraid to approach anybody with with one of those asafoetida bags around the neck. Do you remember your first radio, where you heard it?
Yes, I do. Down at Cecil Jarvis's. It was the old type with the tube sticking up and all the interference. You seldom could hear anything.
Yeah. But when you got anything at all, it was amazing and marvelous, I suppose, no matter whether it's a good program or not.
I'm still fascinated by radio. I loved radio. In fact, that's where I got my early musical training.
Yeah, you could, in those days, of course, nearly every big band was on the air.
Yeah.
And I know the CBS network advertised, one of their big features was listen to CBS for the big bands at night. And you mentioned Enoch Light. Of course, I started my work as a disc jockey, went to Paducah in 45 and worked 14 years full time, and we played Enoch Light. Back then we had transcription libraries. We didn't play phonograph records at the time, or not very many of them. The old 78s didn't reproduce very well, and they had a lot of scratch and noise on them, and so we used a transcription. Then when they brought out the LPs, we'd have Tommy Dorsey and Jimmy Dorsey and Blue Baron, and of course in our own area there was Jack Stallcup, sort of. So there were lots of local bands that had a good deal of merit, as well as...
Well, Paducah in those days had two bands going full time, Jack Stallcup and Harry Ware. I mean, you could make a living in Paducah playing in a jazz band back in those days.
So the recording industry, in a way, has brought millions of dollars to a lot of the bigger stars, but In a sense, I guess it's reduced the demand for the local live music people, hadn't it?
Well, probably so.
I know in the very early days, even local radio stations had bands, so certainly in towns the size of Nashville.
Oh, yeah.
Today, there was a WSM band, you know, of course. Well, they had a lot of them on the Grand Ole Opry. But I can very well recall the studio band at WOR New York. And
well, when I went to Indianapolis, I played in the studio band there the first year, and then they kind of, the union required they
have so many live musicians on the staff. All right. Can you think of anything that you'd like to say that's been particularly impressive to you of your life, especially if it relates to Marshall County in any way?
Well, the most impressive thing to me is, as I look back to my childhood now, is how self-sufficient we were.
Yes.
My dad half soled my shoes. He made our brooms. He cut my hair. My mom made my clothes.
And if she was like my mother, we picked blackberries, and
that's right.
We had a little bit, even though we were renters. All my mother, we picked blackberries, and
that's right.
we had a little bit, even though we were renters all the period until I finally bought the farm my dad and I did from Mr. Dave Booker after World War II. We'd always have hickory trees. We'd pick up hickory nuts and pecans,
walnuts.
And we had walnuts, and there was a grapevine, and there were a couple acres and orchard there at that place we bought. So we had a lot of peaches and apples, and Mother would make kraut. We grew a few peanuts to eat when the neighbors came over to visit. We'd go sit a while in the evening back then, and gosh, as you say, my mother's grocery bill wouldn't have been quarter a week. She just bought soda, salt, sugar, and baking powder, I guess, and that's about it.
One of the highlights of my childhood was, this ought to interest you, was going down to Baldy Creason's. He bought a big, beautiful sounding radio.
Yes.
Was to go down to Baldy Creason's and listen to that radio, and he would have peanuts, popcorn, hickory nuts, and walnuts.
Yeah. Very, very good. If you had your life to live over, would you be happy to start it in Marshall County?
Oh, yes.
And apparently you must have liked something about it, because you did hit the big time. You played in New York. You had a master's degree from Columbia University, and you chose to come back to Marshall County.
Yeah, we're here by choice.
So, that's good.
I like the climate.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Elmo Reed has been our guest on this edition of the Oral History Tape Project, which is being produced by the State Archives in Frankfort, the Murray State University Pogue Library, and for the Marshall County Library with a grant from WCBL Radio in Benton. I'm Ray Mofield speaking.